Again, thank you, everyone. I know that there have been a lot of Veterans Day programs, and you probably attended some already, but we really appreciate you being here with us tonight to honor these special people. So our first veteran is on your left. This is Russ Nelson. And Russ is an Iraqi war veteran. He was in the U.S. Army for over 9 years. He's currently the Deputy Director of Government Relations with the Blinded Veterans Association, and he's a graduate of Guitars for Vets and is part of their graduate band. Russ, take it away.
Part-time when they let me play.
Hello?
There it goes.
There you go. You have to hold
You
it
gotta
up.
put that right up to your face.
I'm only part-time in the band. I'm not very good. I did 9 years when I was, well, pretty much almost 10 years by the time I was retired. 99 to 2009. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it better this way? Yeah, there you go. I was in the military from 1999 till 2009 when I was retired. I was on my last tour in Iraq in 2008 when I was medevaced. I lost most of my sight. Came home, went back to college, met some of these yahoos you see here also. And I don't know, memorable times in the military. I once zip-tied my commander in his tent. That's probably one of my most memorable times.
Well, Russ, you were telling me that you had actually asked a couple of privates to do it, and they backed out.
Yeah, they chickened out. They couldn't do it. They were afraid the commander was going to punish them in ways. I was like, well, that's if he finds out. So they wouldn't do it, so I just did it.
So Russ, the picture that we have up here, the one you sent me, you're standing behind a young lady.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It just shows your height difference. Can you tell us something about that photo?
That was the girlfriend at the time. I think I was either in South Carolina or Fort Knox. It was so long ago, it's hard to believe I used to be skinny. It was a good time in the Army. It was before we switched to ACUs. I liked the BDUs better. You actually got to polish your boots. So, yeah.
And then the next picture that you sent me was one where you're sitting on a couch and you're holding a small child.
That was right before I left on my last deployment. That was a buddy of mine's daughter who was just born, I think about 6 or 9 months before we left. And that was somewhere in 2007, like June 2007.
I think you told me that you were trying to avoid having your picture taken.
Yes.
That's why.
Yeah. I'm not much for pictures. They were asking me for pictures. I was like, I never really took a lot of pictures.
So I'm going to go back to the first slide because you told me when I asked if you had any nicknames, and you said that you had
It's the Hoff.
the Hoff. Sorry, I got that wrong because it's a half. So that you bore resemblance to David Hasselhoff, and so that was what they called you, or the Hoff, not the half.
Don't hassle off is the way I hated the nickname, but I eventually started to embrace it. So when people would bug me, I say, don't hassle the Hoff. Just don't bug me.
All right, thank you. Russ, if you have anything else to share, we'll come back to you, but appreciate that. So our next panelist is veteran Katie Chisholm. And Katie served 21 years in the U.S. Navy. She retired as a Navy chief, and she's currently with the Delhi Veterans Association. So, Katie, go ahead. If you feel more comfortable, if you can project your voice, that would be great. If not, go ahead and use the mic.
Can you hear me? Okay. So yeah, I did 21 years in the Navy. I worked in the Naval Intelligence Bureau, so I can't tell you a lot about it. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. Primarily, I did personal and physical security. Don't have any sea time. Have a lot of OST and duty stations. I was stationed in Germany, Hawaii, California, Fort Devens, Chicago. My first duty station was Scotland, which was my very favorite. my most memorable thing, I made the rank of chief, and 10% of the enlisted people in the Navy accomplished that. So that was a very most memorable achievement for me while I'm in the Navy.
And Katie, tell us about, you said this was the Navy ball on the left here.
So on the left, that was a Navy ball in probably 92 with my husband Paul, he's an Army vet, he's sitting there. So that was us at the Navy Day Ball at Fort Devens, Mass, which is outside of Boston. And then on the right, that was a promotion ceremony when I made E4 in Edson, Scotland.
And then, am I correct, is that Scotland? Is that your
Yeah,
duty
that's
station?
my favorite duty station, so that's Scotland. I worked in this far building kind of in the back, in the middle. We had like a big rolling lever antenna around us, and it looked like we were working inside of an elephant cage. No windows, so most of my duty stations, I didn't have any windows. I was stationed at a Naval Reserve Center outside of Chicago. There I did have windows, but all the other times I worked in a sensitive compartment facility, so no windows.
And Kate, how long were you at each of these duty stations? Do you recall?
Scotland was 2 years because I was single. Everything else was 3. And I retired out of Honolulu, Hawaii, and moved our family back here to Cincinnati. My kids wanted to kill me because they wanted to stay in Hawaii. I could have stayed there as a civilian contractor and probably made 6 figures, but probably spent 7 figures. So I figured that Cincinnati is a perfect possibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Okay, our next veteran is Richard Hutchinson. And Richard served over 25 years in the Army.
No, 18, there's a gap somewhere here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When Eric was
18
born.
years. Okay. He worked his way up in the enlisted ranks to E7 and then went on to Officer Candidate School, retired as a captain. Richard is currently an adjutant at the Chapter Ohio 115 of Disabled American Veterans and is a coordinator for Guitars for Vets.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of covers it up there. It was kind of when I look back on it, that was a really dumb idea to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma in the middle of the summer. That was kind of brutal. But, I was thinking about, I have kind of short-term memory problems here. I'm thinking of a good story, but I don't remember it right. It might come back. So after I left from Fort Bragg, we moved, I was transferred up to 18th Airborne Corps Artillery to the AK Center for Military Assistance. And at that time, I went overseas, Southern European Task Force, also known as U.S. Army Africa. At that time, I was a Cold War, and people don't really understand what the Cold War is. And this was very much a unit within the Cold War, because in the Cold War, there's no direct interaction with Russian troops in America. And this time period was very much a transition. It was more of a conflict between a way of life, of freedom and democracy and free capitalism versus communism and socialism. That's really what the whole war was about. It was a whole ideological kind of war. There were about 2,300 service members killed during that time. There were that. I witnessed a couple. And then, coming back over here, that's the story I want to tell you. If we remind, so anyway, back up here. So when I left Fort Bragg, they got travel orders, and everybody's like, oh God, we're not going to see you again, kind of a thing. It's like nobody ever comes back from there, like, what the, So I go over, flying, this is back in the day, you could fly Pan Am, which was really cool. So I'm flying Pan Am out of Cincinnati to Rome, and we're hanging out in Rome for the delay, flying to Istanbul. And they're back in the 747 in this big Corvette, and didn't have the jet blades upstairs, so I'm going downstairs. 4 or 5 of us were on our Class A uniforms, and I'm getting to the box. This dude comes up behind me and throws a blanket over me and hustles us all into a van. He says, I hate you guys coming from Fort Bragg. You're not supposed to travel in uniform. Don't do that. And so everybody's like, that was my greeting to Southwest Asia. This is going to be kind of cool, really. And it ended up really weird, but that's my kind of interesting story there. I was out for a few years. I was working a lot. I retired from the UC and I was working a lot, and we were doing a project down in Tampa Bay with Southern European Command was down there. We were working a lot with water purification systems and things. So came back. A sergeant major I knew for years dragged me into the Army National Guard. Did that, got commissioned, and then came back in during Desert Shield. And one of the last things on this, I'll sum this up. When Desert Shield started, we were really fortunate that the United States had a lot of leadership who served in Vietnam, right? You have General Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell, a lot of folks that knew how bad that had gotten. And so what my physical security company was, a lot of states established like a core cadre of people that if we needed to go make family notifications on anything, it was us. So you got a lot of senior enlisted officers go do that. Fortunately, we didn't have to. But the units kind of stayed in. They kind of kept those first infantry, then switches over to MP, because physical security kind of fits underneath that. But we got to do some cool stuff. We got to run security of the Dayton Air Show in here. But it was kind of cool when the stealth bomber first came out. We were kind of like, yeah, that's kind of, we're our Army. It's like, oh, it's another airplane. Yeah, it's a big deal. You know, and I always say the joke about the Air Force, right? You know, veterans always talk smack about the other. The best thing about the Air Force is most of their officers always die first. So, hey,
And a really good golf game.
and we have their golf game, that's right. So, yeah, you know, I come from my father was in the military. My dad's family goes back to right after the Revolutionary War. They're one of the first families out to Southwest Ohio. And my grandfather, he did serve in the Revolutionary War. He was injured, was at Valley Forge, and when he got out, when he started sending people, the Department of War, the War Department gave him $75 and a whole bunch of land up in Pleasant Ridge. I would try to go back and reclaim that land, but nobody wants to talk to us. It's like, hey, we were here first, but no, but it's just, I'm really happy to work with these guys here, Peg, Pat, and Russ. We are all with the DAV, we're all with the Guitar Events program, and always promote that as a program. We're a national nonprofit, it's free guitar instruction, it's better with PTSD. And we've been around since 2011. We were 7th chapter, now we're 120 some chapters around the United States, and we've graduated nationally, over 8,000 veterans through the program. And it's just been a really cool thing. Wouldn't have been you, wouldn't have been Russ, you know, it just worked out that way. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, our next veteran is Peg Albert. And Peg is retired from the U.S. Navy. She served 21 years. She retired as a commander, and she is with the Greater Cincinnati Women's American Legion Post 644. Okay?
Is this working?
It-
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, now
That
we're-
picture is of my sister and I when we were first sworn into the Navy, and the officer who swore us in was another nurse, because we were in what they call the Nurse Corps Candidate Program. So that's how we got in. The Navy had a wonderful program, and all the services did, where they needed nurses. So both of us were able to have 2 years of college paid for, and our commitment was 3 years of active duty, which we thought we needed to work that long anyway to pay back our loans. So it was a really, really good deal. And so I was stationed at the Naval Hospital at Bethesda, Maryland, which back then was known as the National Naval Medical Center, because it was the major medical center for the East Coast. Initially was assigned to enlisted surgery units, and you know, these were wards, so you had beds on each side of the main aisle, and most of the guys were really, really good. I mean, they would razz the heck out of each other, but you know, we had a retired chief who was dying, and all the guys were just so quiet and so respectful to let him, you know, be able to die in peace. But the Red Cross did a lot for the patients. At Christmas time, there was a ward decorating contest, so the patients would all get together and they would decorate, you know, usually the first door or two of the ward, and then the Red Cross would give an award to them. And usually they would try to send as many patients as possible home, you know, over Christmas, so they could be with their families. And then all those who had to stay, they put them, you know, kind of combined the wards, so that way the staff had some time off to be able to celebrate the holidays. I did get to meet, Bethesda was, granted it was a naval hospital, but really we had everybody. so it was a really good mix of all the services. We had active, retired, reserve, and I really love working with the retired guys. They generally were World War II vets and just so humble about their service. And one of them I later learned was the officer on duty at Pearl Harbor, and he was the one that said, "This is not a drill." And when National Geographic did the 50th anniversary story about Pearl Harbor, his wife and daughter were mentioned in the article as far as being among the civilians who went to help all the wounded. So it was a real honor to have met him. And I did meet Thurgood Marshall and Admiral Rickover, and I have told some submariners that I got to meet him, and their response was, he was probably nicer to you than he was to us. But they really respected him because he actually inspected every nuclear sub before it went out, because he wanted to make sure everything was 100% the way it should be. So they very much respected him. And then I did actually get to kind of meet President Nixon. He had been in the hospital at Bethesda, and when he was ready to be released, I was working on one of the SOQ floors, and there were a couple congressmen, so he wanted to, make good with them, so he came up to visit them before he went back to the White House. So before he got there, we had Marines all over the place, and Secret Service, and one of the nurses on the floor below me called and said, oh, they needed a piece of equipment, theirs wasn't working. So I go over the stairs, to go down, and the Marine's like, ma'am, you're not going anywhere. I mean, what do you mean I'm not going anywhere? And he said, no, you can't go. So then Secret Service came over, and he, I explained what was going on. He said, oh, just come right back up. So I did, and before he came, there's a beautiful, beautiful vase of roses that was at the nurse's station desk. And as soon as the president was gone, so were the flowers. But I did have the opportunity to work on the first bone marrow transplant unit in the Navy, and generally our patients were either spouses or children of the military. And we really did everything we could to take care of those kids. And this was really very, very new. And none of our kids got sick. We protected every one of them from any kind of infection. But we did sadly lose 3 of them, and then I just asked to be transferred. It was really hard. But one of my funny stories, though, and I told Kate, sometimes the unit was quiet at night, so I cleaned. So I went into my chief's office, and I decided to clean, and I washed his coffee cup. And the next morning, he comes in, and he's like, who did it? He said, I did. And I'm sure if I had been one of the corpsmen, he would have killed me, but he didn't. And then up on the officers' floors, there were funny things. Some of this, I think there were aquariums on 2 of the floors, and the corpsmen would feed the fish. They had a chart. They had a chart on every one of the fish. The doctors would come and do consults on the fish and write their reports. And then one night, usually the supervisor would come down and ask you about anybody who was really very ill, how were they doing, and if you had any VIPs, they wanted to know how they were. So I did have the son of a VIP, and he was in new traction, and they asked, well, how's that? And so we were going to go check it. Well, he wasn't in his rack. So I said, oh, he must be going up and getting a cup of coffee. So we looked around, he was gone. So we had to call the officer of the day to report him as missing. So a little while later, I get a phone call. He is downstairs on the first floor of the hospital with his girlfriend. Yeah, and then he came back upstairs, and he went to bed. And then in the morning, I was giving his 6 o'clock medicines, and he refused to take them. And I'm like, what? And he said, oh yeah, I got to go to something this morning, and I have to make sure I'm awake. And I was just ready to hit him. But, because if he had been at that, he would have been fine. But, and then I had to work all 3 years of the Army-Navy game, so I never got to go see one in person. But it was the best day to work. Nobody bothered you for anything. Everybody was so busy watching the game that, they were all very, very quiet. And then we did have a midshipman who was able to go. This young guy had been very, very serious infection. The doctors were really worried about him, but he was doing well enough. He's begging them, please, please, please let me have liberty to go to the game. So they said he was well enough, he could go. When he got off the elevator after he came back, I swear his feet were not touching the ground. It was just so sweet. And then after I got out, I decided to stay in the reserves. So I was at Great Lakes, Illinois, and Erie, Indiana, and then finally here in Cincinnati. And generally, our 2 weeks of active duty, you go to one of the Navy hospitals. But then, since the Navy is the medical people for the Marines, we were assigned to the Marines at times. So I have been to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Sorry.
Oh my God. And saw that guy.
No, I think I was there before you.
Oh, possible.
But, yeah, Camp Lejeune, and went to Mountain Warfare training up in the Sierras, which was absolutely beautiful country. And then went to Fleet Hospital School at Camp Pendleton, California. And when I got my notice of eligibility to retire, my former CO said, forget it, they're gonna sit on your paperwork, because that was when they had invaded in Kuwait, so we knew things were getting hot. But miraculously, they let me retire, so, but I think it's really hysterical when you're in the reserves and, you retire, they tell you have to reapply when you turn 60. It's just not an automatic thing, and I'm thinking, who the heck would forget when they turn 60 that, they're entitled to their benefits? But it was a very good experience, and the one thing that it took me a long time to realize how much the families serve. And I really would like to thank any family here. We could not have been able to do what we did without your backing us up. And then I just want to say a little bit about the Guard. I think sometimes the Guard doesn't get a lot of credit for what they do, because unless they're activated under national orders, they don't get any kind of a retirement. So I think we owe those folks a lot too. But I was very glad to do it, and thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, is the picture on the left, was that when you graduated from nursing?
I think on the left was whenever you make another rank, you have to have a new photo taken. And so I think that's what that was. And the one on the right was when I actually retired, that they had a big party.
Oh, wonderful.
So.
Thank you. And our next veteran, who is also my brother, is Kath Giblin. And Pat has dual service with both the Marine Corps and the Army. He served over 7.5 years total. He's currently an instructor with Guitars for Vets, and he's the treasurer for the Disabled American Veterans Chapter 115 and a District 1 representative. And he's also a docent with the Tri-State Warbird Museum. Pat?
Hi, everybody. I joined, that first picture of me is, I was barely 18. That was my graduation photo from my beautiful 3-month all expenses paid vacation in Paris Island. And I thoroughly hated it. But I think going back years later, because they let us write letters home. And my dad, a couple years later, showed me those letters. And you would have thought I was having the most horrific experience. I was like the biggest pity party in these letters. But the training, one of the things I discovered in Marine Corps boot camp is that I could run and I could do all the obstacle courses. So that was one thing that they could not yell at me about. And that was a good thing, because we had guys who came into boot camp who were in really lousy shape. And they would send them off to PCP, which was Physical Conditioning Platoon, and the drill instructors referred to it as Pork Chop Platoon. So you didn't want to get in there because there was a very good chance you would not graduate with your class. And me, I could not shoot very well, so I ended up going to MTP, Marksmanship Training Platoon, and didn't qualify until the first day of the following week. So I got to do an extra week at Paris Island because I had to do the sea bag drag across the giant parade deck from 1st Recruit Training Battalion to 2nd Recruit Training Battalion. And I never owned a set of dress blues. Those are the ones that they, like the half dress blues and the cover that they let us wear for the graduation photo. Because when I found out how much it cost to buy a set of dress blues, I thought I could probably spend that money on food and alcoholic beverages and enjoy it a lot more. So I chose to do that. And when after I left Parris Island, my sister and I had the same recruiter. She was a Marine Corps reservist who started the year before I did. And for some reason, from the time I was in the 6th grade, I wanted to be a Marine infantryman. My recruiter had been in the Air Wing, and he saw my ASVAB test scores and said, "You're too smart to be a grunt, and your parents won't sign for you, so you're going to go to the Air Wing." Well, I couldn't do algebra to save my life. And we had these self-paced courses at Millington Naval Air Station, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was right outside of Memphis. So I did get to go to Beale Street, which was nice. And after failing on the self-paced test to advance, to wait for weeks and weeks for a slot to the avionics training, we had to get 100% on these tests, and they were open book tests, and I got the same answer wrong. I came up with the same solution on 3 separate tests, so they said, you're out. You got to find another MOS. And I was dating a sailor at the time. No jokes, Russ. And she said, "You're going to be a jet engine mechanic." I thought, I don't even want to stay here anymore. This is dumb. I love airplanes, but I don't want to work on them. That just sounds like work. So I sit down across from an E7 who's a Vietnam combat veteran. I can tell by all the ribbons he's wearing. And he starts listing all the things that I could do, all the MOSs, the military occupation specialties. And I said, "I want to go infantry." He said, "What?" I said, "I want to go infantry." He said, "We don't get anybody from the Air Wing that wants to go infantry." I said, "Well, send me." So they flew me all the way across the United States to Camp Pendleton, California, and got in with 1st Marine Division. I think the regimental commander was a Korean War vet. He was one of the chosen few at Chosin Reservoir. Or no, that was the commandant, I'm sorry, at the time. They made me a machine gunner, so I'm the smallest guy. They had me carry the 23.2-pound M60 that in the Army, we lovingly refer to it as the pig. And while I was in the Marine Corps, a friend of mine got to go to U.S. Army Ranger School. And he came back and he was telling me how all the weight he lost and how hard it was. And I thought, man, I really want to do that. And my company commander said, "Pat, there aren't enough slots for that." So I actually jumped chain of command, wrangled my way into a slot, got yelled at by my first sergeant, who gave me great advice that I didn't follow. He told me, "When you graduate from Ranger School, go to Marine Recon. Don't stay here." I didn't take good advice. But while I was in Ranger School, I was one of 6 Marines in a class that we started out with 125 and graduated with 65. And I got recycled because in addition to not being able to shoot, apparently I don't know how to use a map and compass at this time. And I failed the land nav course and the land nav retest. And then in the class I got recycled to, I failed the land nav test and barely passed the retest. And never yell F the Army when you're surrounded by a bunch of soldiers, like someone I know did when we were up in the mountain training camp, mountain ranger camp in Dahlonega. I had to do push-ups for something. And we would do 10 push-ups and then 1 for the ranger in the sky. So I do that 11th push-up, and then they say, "Do 1 for the Army," and everybody's standing in a loose formation, and the other 5 Marines are near. And I just thoroughly indoctrinated Marine, just yelled out, "F the Army," at the top of my lungs, and then I realized where I was. And all the Marines moved a step back away from me. We have no idea who this guy is. So I learned how to do bubble ups. Yes, the instructor took me into the ice-cold mountain-fed creek to a place that was about waist deep and made me do sit-ups in there. So my head's underwater and got thoroughly soaked and got yelled at by the ranger instructors. And then we went out on a night patrol and I body heat dried my clothes and we were all good. I got out of the Marine Corps in September of '83, and then I watched on television while the U.S. Army Rangers jumped into Point Salinas and Grenada, and then later the Marine Corps showed up, and the 82nd Airborne showed up. And thought, what? I did all this infantry training, and nothing. We did get some awesome deployments. The unit I was with, we would be stateside for 18 months, and then 6 months we would go on a Westpac cruise. So I got to go to Okinawa, Philippines, Korea. It was very hilly and cold. Mainland Japan, we spent 3 months in these Quonset huts at Camp Fuji. We saw Mount Fuji so often we got tired of seeing it. This beautiful mountain, which is still an active volcano. And we're like, that again. And then we had 5 days liberty in Hong Kong when it was still a British protectorate, and it was wonderful. I wish I would have gone back as a civilian for a while, but I don't think I had enough money. I got out of the Marine Corps, came back to Cincinnati, had no idea what I was going to do, and as soon as my dad said, son, you need to start looking for a job, I found an Army recruiter, and he said, hey, I told him I had been through Ranger School, I was a corporal when I got out, I said, I want to keep my rank, and he said, do you want to go to the Ranger Battalion? I was thinking of going to Special Forces. I said, I want to go SF. So I get down to Fort Benning, I wear glasses, some master sergeant says, you can't go into Special Forces, your vision's too bad. I said, well, what about another airborne unit? He said, well, what about the Rangers? I thought, man, I hate their haircuts and the disciplines like the Marine Corps. Yeah, I'll do that. So they were forming the 3rd Ranger Battalion on Fort Benning. So I went through, they made me go through part of basic training, then AIT, then went right to airborne school, went right to the Ranger Battalion. And actually, I think I grew up in the Marine Corps, but I really learned how to apply what I learned in the Ranger Battalion. And that photograph is my jungle boots from probably about 3,000 feet. When we jumped out of a C-141 one day, and before we went, you know, my first sergeant said, you can't bring cameras with you, so. You gotta get creative. So remember the disc cameras? They have this little thing. So I got some suspension line parachute cord, 550 cord, tied it around my neck, stuck it under my shirt, and as soon as I made sure my canopy was open, I started snapping pictures, and that was the first one I took.
Wow.
And we did a lot of jumps. That was on Fryer Drop Zone actually in Alabama, across the Chattahoochee River from, used to be Fort Benning, now it's Fort Moore. And the battalion, we did a training in Alaska. I didn't have to go. I didn't want to go anyway, but they sent me a primary leadership development course, so I missed the Alaska thing. And the guy said it was really cold and we were miserable. And then the unit, they went to Panama for jungle operations. I missed that one because they sent me to the next professional development course, and I was kind of bummed because they got to see Cootamundis and go through the jungle and all that stuff. But we did get to jump into Honduras and be led around up and down mountains by the Honduran Rangers for about 5 days. They carried little bitty packs with a poncho and water, and we carried about 40 pounds of gear, and they laughed at us the whole time because we're crawling up these mountains, and these guys are. And we didn't have night vision goggles at the time, so when it gets black night in the jungle, you can't see your hand in front of your face. Everybody stops. You stop and sleep where we were until first light, and then you keep moving, because the ones who tried to move around to answer the call of nature. You might hear them crash, crash, crash down the hill. And my last, I participated in Best Ranger competition in 1987, and I was really physically banged up after that, so I wrangled a move into S4, which is supply, which enabled me, they thought I was going to get out about a year later than I actually did. So they sent me back to Jumpmaster School and Pathfinder School, which was awesome. And then I got to go over to Egypt in 1987 with Charlie Company in our battalion for Operation Bright Star. Got to work with the Egyptian commandos, and it was really weird to work with people who were using all Soviet Union stuff. They carried AK-47s, they flew Soviet helicopters, they had kind of Soviet uniforms, and they were on our side. But it was overall, the military was a fantastic experience. And I got really banged up jumping, injuries that linger, but it's an experience that I wish more young people would consider. Because there are there's a lot of good young people in all the branches of the military now, and it is definitely a noble cause to be a part of. Thank you.
And I just, I have to go back to this because we would laugh in our family about the difference. He looks terrified.
He was.
And just a few years later, he looks all savvy and wise. So,
I wasn't.
Anyway, that, well, we're not ending yet, but that's the end of the talks here. Does anyone have any questions, or any service members, any veterans have anything they want to share? Maybe that, is something that one of these veterans said.
I want to ask Russ, what was your commander's reaction when he got zip tied into his tent?
I never found out, so he never found out it was me. He shouldn't have brought a civilian tent, so he probably didn't want to look for me either.
Yes,
I want to ask you, are you an elder graduate?
Russ?
That would be you,
Oh,
right?
me?
Yes.
No. I grew up in Florida.
Oh, you did?
I met my wife.
Sounds like an elder, I used to hire elder boys at Sisters of Charity, and they were the most, I said,
Lively bunch.
I prayed and I said, if I ever hire another elder boy, please remind me of what they did to me mentally. They would throw Jell on the ceiling to see if it would stick. And I had no idea why all the red spots were on the ceiling. And then they used to shove stuff down in between the elevators in this slot about this big, and then all these papers were down there. And
The
they would
Army-
race through the hallways to Mother Margaret Hall and knock over these statues if there were prized possessions. And so just that sounded like an elder graduate right there.
Combat MOSs in the military are pretty much the same mindset. We're a bunch of idiots. We never grow up. My wife hates it. She probably, if she had to do it over again, she probably wouldn't marry me.
Anyway, sorry about taking all that, but that was,
No.
you just sounded like the zip-tied elder boy.
It truthfully pissed me off when I found out our commander brought a civilian tent. And I was like, well, these boys need a hazing. They're brand new to our unit. We'll go zip tie him in his tent. And they couldn't do it. They were afraid they were going to get caught.
So Russ, what was the difference between the tent that the,
Oh, you got-
he was
Yeah,
in?
living space. So if you remember the old half tents, we still used them in training. So,
Shelter house.
Shelter
Shelter
house.
house.
So you're in these
Civil
tiny
War
little
technology.
tents. You sleep on the floor, and he brought his cot and his big civilian tent, his little air conditioner, and I was like, oh yeah, he had a couple.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are you going to tell us about your career in the military?
Oh,
Yeah.
So as Pat mentioned, we were pretty close. I went in the Marine Corps Reserves in September of '78, and I did Parris Island, where just like Pat, I was terrified. And I was 17 when I went in, and my mom swore that she was not going to sign the paper. But I turned 18, and we were not I turned 18 in boot camp. And I remember it was 6 weeks before they would let us get a call from home. We could get letters, and I remember walking into the drill instructor's office, and she said, "Remember your military, Baron Giblin." And I picked up the phone and I said, "Mom," and my dad said, "Dad," and I just started bawling, and she's like, "Nothing like wasting your breath." But those women, we had 3 female drill instructors in the Marine Corps, and I still remember their names. When I joined the Army 10 years later, I can't tell you what the names of the drill instructors were because they were much more lenient, and but I did 3 years. I did 6 months active duty, and then did 2.5 years reserve duty. 10 years later, I was dispatching for Cincinnati Police, and that's where I first met Alan March, who's a retired Cincinnati officer. And but I was bored. I was kind of bored with life, and like Pat, I'm like, I just thought, I think I'm going to go back in. I'm going to go. I want to go active duty. I want to get the full experience. And so I went in as I was a 91 Tango was my military occupational skill, and I was an animal care technician, which is a vet tech. And so I got to go overseas, and I was stationed in Naples, Italy, and I kept re-upping over there because I got to do surgeries on animals. I was stationed on a Navy base because at that time the Army was the only branch that had veterinary services, and so I knew if I went stateside, I would just be working in like a vaccination clinic. So I kept re-upping and staying, so I stayed 5 years in Naples. And like Pat said, I look back at that as really the best decision I ever made in my life, was to go. I mean, the Marine Corps was good, but boy, they were way behind as far as women were concerned back in the 70s. They actually, in basic training, we learned how to apply makeup. And when they took our picture, like Pat's picture, we wore our military greens, and we had to wear eyeshadow and lipstick. And a lot of these girls were farm girls. They were country girls, and they really bucked that. But I mean, and we didn't handle a weapon. We didn't go to an obstacle course. And I thought, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So that was another motivator to go back in. And I chose the Army because, I was limited in my choices. I think maybe Katie, you mentioned this when we were talking earlier, but I had 6 months and 28 days on active duty. And because of those 28 days, I was considered prior service. And so the Navy they were not taking any prior service personnel, and neither was the Air Force. So, I used to say I would never join the Army, they take anybody. But honestly, it was just the best, it was the best choice I ever made. And like Pat said, I wish more young people would embrace that.
Well, when I used to help with recruiting missions, I would always tell them when they ask me, well, what's it like? It's a lifestyle. You have to like the lifestyle. And certain personalities just do better in those lifestyles. And I just tended to be one of those. But, not without moving up and down rank, of course, because I would pull stupid pranks. But.
Yeah, I was going in for 4 years. Next thing you know, I had 10 years in. Like 20. And also, I was a military brat. My dad did 20 years in the Army. I spent half my childhood in the Army. He told me, don't join the Army. They treat women like shit. Sorry. But once I listened to him.
Well, Pat, let me share something real funny. I hope I'm talking loud enough. I did go to jump school. I only went in 3 years. We got off the bus from AIT and all that at Fort Sill, Fort Benning. Me and the guy I knew went into a 3-man room, and you write your name on the door. We made up a guy's name. Well, the E5 went around and copied names off all the doors. Oh, that guy was in trouble all the time. I can't make this up, it happened. This guy was, and a couple guys were in on it. Where's this, we just saw him drinking beer, it's only lunchtime. They never caught him though, they never caught him.
That's great. Are there any other questions? I mean, we really encourage you. even, family members, as Peg mentioned. Yeah, how many veterans do we have here in the audience tonight?
I can't see you.
We have four veterans, is that right? Well, thank you and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Panelists, do you have anything that you want to add?
I had the privilege of this past October going down to Fort Moore. It was the 40th anniversary of the 3rd Ranger Battalion being formed. So we got to meet all these young guys, and the stuff they're doing is so much more high speed and kick butt than we ever did. And we got to be present for a change of responsibility ceremony. And one of the coolest moments was having some of my NCOs, senior NCOs when I was in, were Vietnam combat veterans, and they had the companies recite the Ranger Creed, and we recited it with them, and hearing about 800 voices doing the Ranger Creed echoing off these walls was so cool. And when we activated in October 3rd of 1984, off to the side there were the World War II 3rd Ranger Battalion veterans. And their battalion commander this October happened to mention, he said that the difference in ages between the young guys that we met down there and us is the same as was the World War II veterans and us. Because we looked over there and like, look at these old guys, man, they're pretty tough. And then I'm looking at them, looking at me, and I told every one of them I met, I said, drink this in, because 40 years from now you're going to look back from this and you're going to think, this is the coolest thing I ever did. Except maybe getting married and having a kid. That's what they're going to tell their wife, the coolest thing is. But when they get with their friends, it'll be that. And all the memories and the friends, and seeing those guys again after so many years, it's like the intervening years never happened.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank the panelists, Russ, Katie. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your stories with us. And thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for